Abyssal Murmurs. Lately, I've been trying to send you stories every day, but I feel like a large number of people who have signed up almost never come back to listen to the stories. I don't know where that is. Make you unhappy. I hope to receive comments and suggestions from you. And if you find the video good, please give me a like to give me more motivation. For those who have not yet subscribed, don't forget to click the subscribe button and press notification bell to wait for the next story. Now let's get into the story. Story 1. It was approaching the end of summer, and my friends and I wanted to do some cool, mischievous things before going back to school. So we had the genius idea one night to sneak into a nearby community pool. It was actually only a couple blocks away. It's right smack in the middle of a residential area. So instead of sitting on a main road or something, it actually just sat around a bunch of houses on a quiet road. During the hot day, the little parking lot would be full and the spot would be bustling. But at 1 a.m, the place was, of course, dead. There's obviously a big fence surrounding the whole front entrance, as well as a cage that gets closed up when the place closes. So our best way was to get in through the side. We snuck into the backyard of a neighboring house and hopped the fence over to the pool. It was as easy as that. The 4 of us took off our shirts and jumped into the pool, which in retrospect wasn't smart, since any of the neighbors could have heard the splashes and just called the police. But we were dumb high schoolers. It was very, very dark within that whole enclosing. This pool had no lights, which is why it closed at sunset. James, Courtney, and Alyssa were on the other side of the pool, as I was just kind of doing my own thing at first, swimming around and getting my face wet. I saw Alyssa get out of the pool shortly after and run away. I swam over to see what was going on. She was just going to the water fountain, though. The 3 of us just bopped around in the water for a bit, and eventually we heard Alyssa jump back into the pool from the other side. It was too dark to see much more than her black hair covering her face. But just then, we heard Alyssa playfully call something to us as she was walking back to the pool. The 3 of us in the pool looked at each other. I know they were doing the same thing as me, counting heads. There were 3 of us on this side of the pool, and here came Alyssa walking over to our side. So, who was that on the other side? Alyssa got in, but the 3 of us were distracted, looking at the head bopping around the water across the pool. James said across the pool, "Who is that?" Not even 2 seconds later, the head went underwater and disappeared from view. We took this time to whisper to each other. Mostly things like, what should we do? What if that's security? And should we run? Suddenly, I felt something grab my leg with force and tried pulling me down into the water. I kicked, splashed, and yelled for help. James came over to pull me out of the pool, while the girls were already running for it, screaming. It wasn't until I got to the stairs of the pool that the grip on my leg was released, and I was free. We hopped the same fence we climbed over to get in, and ran all the way back to Alyssa's house. I was convinced that whoever that was a security guard. That is, until they literally tried to pull me under the water. You don't know what to think. There are a few possibilities. Maybe it was just another kid messing with us. Maybe it was a security guard who went way too far. Or most likely, it was a dangerous person who had ill intents. Story 2. It was an ordinary day, like any other. 85 degrees out. Family getting ready to jump in the pool. I was looking for my 6-year-old brother so I could help him into the pool. But I thought I'd just wait for him in the pool instead. My parents were still inside while I got ready to jump in the pool, but I didn't because I saw something dark sitting at the bottom of the pool. It took me a few seconds to realize it was my little 6-year-old brother at the bottom of the pool. It took my young brain a few moments to realize he wasn't playing around. I screamed in such a loud and high pitch, you would think it was a little girl if you heard it. I remember the feeling of my skin crawling as my helpless 8-year-old self didn't know what to do. My parents burst out the back door. My dad dove into the pool and grabbed my little brother from the bottom. It was nothing short of a miracle that my dad managed to resuscitate him, though. Thereon, after we weren't allowed back into the pool unsupervised until we were both at least 10 years old. Story 3. I remember waking up from a deep sleep and looking at the clock, seeing it was around 2 in the morning when I heard splashes coming from my pool in the backyard. My bedroom window didn't have a view of the pool, so I had to run downstairs to the den to get a view. And let me tell you, I was freaking out on my way down there, especially given that I live alone. The blind was shut, but the windows were open, and I could still hear a little splashing coming from the pool. I had to be quiet, opening the blinds. Otherwise, I risked exposing myself. I lifted the blinds only enough to get a view of the pool, but the splashing stopped. I waited a few minutes before deciding it was safe to go outside. I walked up to the pool and nearly had a heart attack when I saw a body submerged underwater on the shallow end. I pulled the body out of the water, hoping it was more than just a body still, but he didn't seem to be breathing. I looked around my yard in a panic, and by an off chance caught a glimpse of somebody standing in my bushes. I ran back inside of my house and called 911. The police arrived surprisingly quickly and followed me to the backyard to find nothing but an empty pool. The body was gone, and so was the person standing in my bushes. Story 4. This happened when we were staying in a small country inn. It was a family trip to some distant resort where our extended family would be meeting us. It was such a long drive, however, that we needed to stop for the night. The inn was across the street from some big fruit stand and some crops. Other than that, it was thick forest in every direction. There were a couple other cars parked in the parking lot, so we weren't the only ones. We arrived there after eating dinner at some small diner, so the day was basically over. The sun had set, but it was still early and we didn't know what to do. So we decided to hop in the pool that the inn surprisingly had. There was no one around to stop us, so as far as we knew, it was allowed. We kind of just played typical pool games that we played ever since we were little kids, like Shark. We thought it being dark made it more fun, even though it was kind of creepy being surrounded by nothing but forest for miles. For whatever reason, I was peering over to the woods. There was a guy just standing by a couple trees. He didn't appear to be attempting to hide or anything. It was blatantly obvious he was glaring over to us. I did a little side head nod to my brother to let him know what I saw. He looked over and said, "Jesus Christ, that's creepy." The man then walked over to the poolside and took a seat on one of the lounge chairs. He just looked at us and said, "Wonderful night for a swim, huh?" And then a pretty off-putting chuckle. My brother and I did our little fake polite laughs and said, "Yeah." Meanwhile, all that we were thinking was, all right, it's time to get out of the pool. But I guess we didn't want to make it obvious that we were leaving because of him. It was so painfully uncomfortable that my brother and I didn't even speak to each other. Then the man got up, still watching us, and walked over, literally, to the edge of the pool and just stood there looking down at us. Eventually, I asked if he worked with the hotel, and he completely ignored my question. That's when things got really uncomfortable. I whispered to my brother, "We should go." As soon as we started moving towards the ladder, The man started walking fast over to the ladder. So we stopped and stayed in the pool. We played it off like nothing about it was weird, but my heart was racing, and I knew my brother's was too. The pool had stairs on one side as well, but as we tried to make our way over to them, the man seemed to inch his way to the stairs too. We were trapped in there, not knowing what he was planning, but by some stroke of luck, our dad appeared from behind the corner of the building, calling us to come out of the pool. We both screamed help and accused the man of trying to hurt us. Our dad, who was much taller than the man, sized him up, pushed him, yelled at him, and threatened to call the police. I remember the man didn't say anything in response. He just walked away slowly as my dad yelled curse words at him. His reaction to our dad alone suggested that he had intentions of doing something wrong, like, God forbid, kidnapping us. Story 5. I'm going to share a very disturbing memory from my early years. My name is Daniel. When I was 6, maybe 7 years old, our family lived in New Jersey. Our old house was on a very quiet street. We had the same next-door neighbor living next to us for as long as I was alive. One hot day when it was just my dad home, the neighbor came over and introduced himself to me as Paul. He asked my dad if he could take me to his pool, and from what I remember, he seemed very genuine and nice. I guess that's why my dad let me go with him. I remember hopping around on the shallow end of his pool, and he swam in the deeper end, watching me the whole time, smiling. He asked me questions like where I go to school, what I do for fun, what shows do I like, and so on. He asked me if I knew how to swim, and I shook my head, no. He swam over to me and started lifting my legs and arms, trying to show me how to swim. It didn't really work out, but he said he'd invite me over one night and keep helping me. Well, apparently one night was the next night. I heard splashes coming from the pool next door from my room as I was laying in bed. I opened the window and saw Paul looking up to my window, waving. He called up to my window to come on over with my bathing suit. Excited by the thought of it, I threw on my bathing suit and snuck out the front door. It's funny, I knew well enough that what I was doing would go against my parents, given that I knew to sneak out. That night, as we were in the pool together, Paul was extra touchy as he was supposedly showing me how to swim, but at the same time, I didn't realize what was going on. Suddenly, I heard the shout of my dad from my window, and less than half a minute later, my dad was in Paul's backyard, yelling at him, threatening to get a restraining order if he ever came near me again. My parents had me describe what Paul did to me, and I said nothing, because that's truthfully what I believed. They told me to never speak to Paul again, and pretty soon started looking for a new house. In the meantime, however, one night, out of curiosity, I sat up from my bed and looked out the window. There was Paul, standing in his pool, looking up at my window, waving me over once again, but also putting his finger on his lips, meaning to be quiet. I shut the blinds and ignored him, listening to my parents. A few nights later, around the same time, there was a knock at the window, or at least I thought it was a knock at first. It just sounded like a loud thump. Then there was another one. I opened my window and saw Paul down below, in our backyard. He spoke up to me in a soft voice, asking me to sneak down and we'll hang out inside his house. I shut the window and went straight to my parents' room and told them. My mom screamed at my dad to go break Paul's neck. My mom held me in her arms as she got on the phone with the police. Meanwhile, we both heard my dad yelling incomprehensible things outside. Paul was arrested for attempting to lure a child. I don't know much else about what happened though, because the next day, my mom and I stayed with my grandma until we moved to a new house. I never really talk about this with my parents, only because it's very uncomfortable to talk about, and it's also just a painful memory. Thank you for always supporting the channel and welcoming its videos. Wishing you good health, and remember to subscribe to the channel to achieve 1,000 subscriptions.